Revenge films.
At that time, I was on cloud nine that I thought I was about to have my first child. And that day was my wife's expected due date. And I had taken leave from my company. I was at the hospital. My wife was right in the middle of her contractions and raising her voice while tolerating the pain, and I did everything I could to cheer her on as I tried to gently support her body. Eventually, the time between the contractions became shorter, and as it was all happening, my mother-in-law also arrived, and she was talking to her daughter. But then, suddenly my wife called out for
Adam!
a name that I had never heard before. For a moment, I didn't know what had happened, but my mother-in-law was standing next to me looking horrified. Amidst all of that, my wife was desperately getting through labor pain, so it seemed she had no idea whose name she had just called out. Shortly after, my wife was taken into the delivery room and she gave birth to the baby. That was the one and only time that she said that name, but I couldn't help but to be left with an uneasy feeling in my chest. That, in such a dire moment, a man's name that I had never heard before came out of my wife's mouth. My wife didn't know anything and she just said to me,
The baby was so cute, wasn't she?
but no matter how hard I tried, that name was stuck in my head, and I wasn't able to genuinely be excited about the baby. It may be awful of me to say this, but in that moment, I found myself suspecting my wife of an affair. 1 week later, my wife was discharged from the hospital and she came back home. I thought about asking my wife about that name, but it seemed that she didn't remember it at all. So, I thought there was no point in asking her, and at the same time, I had a fear of knowing the truth, so I couldn't bring myself to ask. I still remained with an uneasy feeling, but since the baby was born, in order to make room for all the baby goods, we needed to clean up our apartment. I was focused on the cleaning as if I was trying to clean away the uneasiness, but then I found my wife's personal belongings in the drawer, and that was a key ring that didn't have anything strange about it. But when I flipped it over, it froze on the spot. On the back of the key ring was the name Adam written in bold. I grabbed the key ring and I went straight to show it to my wife. What is this key ring?
That belongs to my friend, but maybe they forgot it here.
Interesting. While you were giving birth, you were calling out his name. But do you remember? When I said that, I could tell my wife's face obviously looked terrified. And that face was clearly flustered, and perhaps she thought she couldn't hide it. And she began to spell out the truth. She said that she really had no memory of calling out that name while giving birth, but it turns out that this guy named Adam was actually her ex-boyfriend, and that she was going out with him until right before she started dating me. However, when she started dating me, she told him many times that she wanted to break up, but he wasn't really accepting of it, and that for a short time, we overlapped as her boyfriend, but that ever since we got married, she hasn't seen him once. To be honest, when my wife told me all of this, I felt like I was being kicked to the bottom pit of hell. It may be true that she hasn't seen him once since we got married, but that doesn't change the fact that while we were dating in the first place, she was two-timing. But I know my wife, who was working really hard with the chores and making meals for us, even with her big belly. So I couldn't bring myself to just blow her off either. That's why I asked her that if those words were in fact true, then there should be no problem for us to do a DNA test of our child. And my wife nodded. Based on my wife's reaction, I figured that the baby must be my child, but I didn't want this to bother me in the future, so I confirmed with my wife that we would all do the DNA test. As a result, we found out that the baby was in fact my child, and I was relieved from the bottom of my heart. I had a lot of thoughts and feelings about my wife's truth, but it didn't change the fact that she did choose me. And more than anything, I was able to confirm the fact that the baby was my child, so I decided to forgive my wife. When my wife heard those words, she cried tears of happiness. A lot happened, but I thought that finally, my true happiness had arrived. However, one day, suddenly my wife disappeared, leaving the baby and a letter. The letter read that she was going back to her ex-boyfriend, that the baby was mine and therefore it would be hard for them to raise her. So that's why she was going to leave her behind. When I read that, my mind went completely blank. With no trace of my wife anywhere, I went into a panic, and without thinking about anything, I went outside. But of course, I didn't know where my wife had gone, and back home I still had the baby, so I picked up the phone and called my sister. My older sister lived in the neighborhood, and she was living with her husband and their two daughters that were 10 and 8, but when I told her what happened, she came flying over. And then, for the time being, I took the baby with me to my sister's house, and I explained everything that happened to my brother-in-law as well. The baby wasn't even 6 months old yet, and we all decided that it would be impossible for me to raise her by myself given that I had to work, so for a while, we decided to put her in my sister's care. My brother-in-law had his own business and my sister was essentially a full-time housewife while helping him. So they told me not to worry about the baby and all I could do was put my head down and thank them. My brother-in-law asked me what I was going to do about my wife and I told him that I would like to find her and that ex-boyfriend and collect a settlement fee from the both of them. But that I didn't know where they could be, so I didn't know what to do. I also told him that I wanted to hire a detective agency, but that I was also worried about the money when my brother-in-law started making phone calls right in front of me. My sister and I grew up in the suburbs and we both moved to the city as adults, but this was my brother-in-law's hometown. Because he owned a local business and he also had a lot of friends since his youth. Apparently he had been asked many times before about finding people's whereabouts. My brother-in-law said to me, "I use one of my connections, so let's wait it out for a little while." He was kind enough to make the call, so I decided to go by his words. However, a few days later, I found out my wife and her ex-boyfriend's location faster than I expected. It turned out that the ex-boyfriend was her manager that was working in the headquarters at my wife's job, and we got both his home address and the company name. Apparently, my wife was currently being seen going in and out of that ex-boyfriend's house. I was shocked at how fast detectives were, and right away I hired a lawyer, and using the information that my brother-in-law's contact had given me, I sent an official notice to that ex-boyfriend's office. And then, because the two of us had not gotten a divorce yet, in order to go through with the divorce, we decided to have a discussion with the lawyer present. We asked for a private room in a restaurant just in case, and I faced my wife, but suddenly her first words to me were,
How dare you send an official notice to Adam's company? Thanks to you, he was fired! What are you going to do about it?
And she started screaming at me with an incredible force. Apparently, the company found out that my wife's ex-boyfriend had an affair with a married woman from the official notice that was sent by the lawyer. It turns out that his girlfriend was also in the company, and that girlfriend happened to be the daughter of a board member, and he was instantly fired. Take that. Before I met with my wife, my lawyer had already predicted my wife's actions, and he told me to try not to get emotional like her and to stay as calm as possible while dealing with her. So that's an obvious outcome. It's a very common thing for an official notice to be sent when someone is having an affair. So that's an obvious outcome. It's a very common thing for an official notice to be sent when someone is having an extramarital affair. Don't tell me that you thought that you would be exempt from that for whatever reason. When I said that, my wife threw a tantrum and she was just screaming profanities at me, even though we were in front of a lawyer. Just as I was instructed by my lawyer, I remained calm, and the lawyer explained the rest of what was about to happen to my wife. He informed her that both she and her ex-boyfriend would both be sued for a settlement fee in the 10,000s. When my wife heard that amount, she immediately changed her tune and said she wanted to start over with me and that she couldn't forget about the child, but of course, there was no way that I was going to forgive her. I told her that the child was my child and that I had no intention of ever letting my soon-to-be ex-wife see her for the rest of her life, and that no matter what, they were going to be paying the settlement fee. Once I explained this all to her, there was no more need to sit there, so I had her sign the divorce papers straight away, and my lawyer and I left in the private room. I could hear my wife yelling that I was a monster and to go to hell. But I could only imagine that the one going to hell was going to be my ex-wife. And then, from the ex-boyfriend who had lost his work and his life, he paid the settlement fee in one payment. For my ex-wife, I had my lawyer make it so that she would have to pay quite the amount every single month for many years from now. By the way, once everything was over, I went to my former in-laws and I told them that I had no intention of letting them see their grandchild ever again. My former in-laws were really looking forward to having a grandchild, so apparently they went straight to my ex-wife, and I could clearly imagine what kind of war zone it must have been. But after being fooled 2 times, and having her also throw the baby away, I couldn't find any sympathy. And after that, until my baby girl got a little bit older, I decided to move in with my sister and her family. My brother-in-law is very kind, and because my sister's children were both girls, they took really good care of my baby. To be honest, even though I was betrayed 2 times by my ex-wife, I truly believe that the saving grace was that the baby really was my child. From now on, I'm going to be a single father, but I plan on treasuring this baby and raising her with everything I can.
How was today's video? If you enjoyed it, please subscribe, like, and leave a comment. Stay tuned for more.